We understand.
No jumping.
You can't boogie.
That's a traditional. But we can't play. Thank you, Max. Okay. They say a kinnor is a harp, but I'm not sure. I'm not convinced it's a harp.
It's in time.
The symbols and drums, trumpets. We know for sure. Yeah. Okay, we're in the middle of a Mishna where this is a welcome first to our weekly class in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, at chapter 5, and this is Mishna 6. Chance to sing. It seems from the commentators that the day, Adam was created. But they were not intermingled. Each one had its boundaries. The serpent symbolized Adam and Eve had their domain. They were in the domain, they were in paradise. They were in a domain of only strict, total, comprehensive positivity. something negative associated with it. Even the best of intentions to do good things will offend somebody and it cause someone to do something wrong. You can't just do good without the repercussions in the area of negativity that have an effect. Which something good won't come out of it. Something good will always come out of everything, even the most horrible evil. The one who rebelled against Moses' first cousin, who decided that he wants to take away the leadership from Moses, and he argues that everybody is holy, everyone is good, and why are you proclaiming yourselves to be, you and Aaron, your brother, to be the leaders, to be above everyone else? And Korach did not believe that God had chosen Moses and Aaron to be the leaders. He denied the authorship of the Torah in effect, because Moses was the one who transmitted, except for the Ten Commandments, the rest of the Torah, so he denied that authorship, and he was punished by being swallowed up by the earth. Now, it's obvious over here that Korach was a product of Adam and Eve's sin, because what did Adam and Eve's sin bring about? It brought about a lack of separation in a positive way. Supposed to be a separation between good and evil, and Adam and Eve, by virtue of their sin, brought about the mixture between good and evil. Korach did not respect the differences. He said everyone is equal. One of his arguments was, why do you proclaim yourselves to be better than everyone? We're all the same. We all heard God speak at Mount Sinai. Why do you separate between one and another? In other words, he was arguing, on one hand, he was creating a division, and on the other hand, he was saying that everyone is equal. This is usually what happens with people who's fighting for equality, but in the process of fighting for equality, they create the greatest division. I always like to use contemporary examples. The example in the 20th century is of communism. The theory of communism is everyone is a part of one communal entity. We're all equal comrades. We're no longer, I'm the big shot, you're the nobody. But in effect, it created the greatest disparity between people, between the haves and the have-nots, between the leaders and the followers and anyone else who didn't agree with them. That's what usually happens. So Korach, on one hand, is creating, Korach's name, as I mentioned last week, comes from the word boldness. He created a separation, he created division, with the argument that we're all equal and we're all one and there is no need for division. And that's what happened. That's why, when was the mouth that swallowed him up, when did it happen? It happened at twilight between Friday and Shabbat and the Sabbath. Twilight in general, what is twilight? Twilight is a time that divides between day and night, so it symbolizes division, but twilight is also a mixture of day and night. In Jewish law, twilight is considered to be doubtful whether it's day or night. It's also considered to be part day and part night. So twilight exactly represents what Korach was all about. Korach was all about division and unification the wrong way. The wrong division and the wrong unification. And that's why the earth opened up and swallowed him at that particular time. Now, why did the earth swallow him? God could have punished him many other ways. There are many ways. God is very creative. After all, he created the universe. If God wanted to bring about his death, he could have just given him a heart attack, and he could have just dropped dead on the spot. Why did he have to be swallowed up by the earth? And God had to create the potential for that at twilight of the first Sabbath. So one way of understanding that is that Korach was also a positive person. Korach was not motivated strictly by pursuit of power, of glory. It degenerated into that. But Korach, we're taught, was a visionary. He was able to see into the future. So far into the future that he was able to see the Messianic age. In the Messianic age, there will be complete unity. The divisions that we now have will disappear. So a lot of divisions that we have won't be necessary. The Messianic age is the age where the whole world will be drenched, will be saturated, will be deluged with knowledge of God. What is the metaphor for that? The metaphor, biblical metaphor, is the sea, the ocean. In the ocean, everything, when you look at the ocean, you don't see any of the creatures. They're all submerged in the waters. Everything is contained within the waters. And there's total unity. Of course, there's no unity. The sharks eat smaller fish. But when we look at it, we don't see the divisions. And because we're all submerged in the water. That's a metaphor for the Messianic age, when the whole world will be submerged in divine knowledge. And that vision is the vision that Korach saw, but when he wanted that, it was premature. The world is not ready for that type of unification. The world still needed the divisions that were existing then. So what is the metaphor for a false being swallowed up? It's being swallowed up by the earth. Instead of being swallowed up by the water, which is the positive metaphor, the negative metaphor is swallowed up by the earth. But it points to the fact that in the future, there will be this, Korach's vision will become a reality. There will be a much greater unity than exists today. There'll still be differences, necessary differences, but the unnecessary differences will vanish. Then we go to the next thing, the mouth of the well. Which well are we talking about? There's one very famous well, the well of Miriam. But the Jewish people were released from Egyptian bondage. They're in the desert, and there's no water. And they complain. In good Jewish tradition, you complain. And Moses was told by God to strike the rock, and the rock produced water. And this rock traveled with them for 40 years. And they always had enough water coming from this rock. It was not just enough for drinking, it was enough for bathing, it was enough to use as a mikveh. It was an incredible miracle. But that stopped. At what point? Miriam, Moses' sister, about a year before they left the desert, the water ceased. And the people complained again. And God tells Moses to speak to the rock, and the rock will give water again. But before we go into that, why did the water cease? So the Talmud tells us that the reason why they had this water was not just because they needed water, so God gave them water. It was in the merit of Miriam, because of what she did with water. What did she do with water? When Moses was a little baby and put into a little box and thrown into the Nile, she waited there by the Nile to see what will happen. And she was the one who called Moses' mother to nurse the child. So what she did was associated with water. So in her merit, the water that God supplied the people with for 40 years was in her merit because of her righteousness. As soon as she passed away, and she was no longer there physically, the water ceased. And Moses had to do something else to bring about continuation of this water supply. What happened with that well? So our sages tell us that well entered the land of Israel with the Jewish people, and it ended up in Yam Kinneret, in the Kinneret Sea. That means that Miriam's well that was created on the twilight of the first week of creation lasted until this day, is still there. And when Mashiach comes, we'll all be able to directly benefit from it. So Miriam's Well came about, on one hand, because of something negative. Number one, it was a response to a complaint. Number two, and the main point was, why did they need a well in the desert? Because they were stuck in the desert, again, because of their transgression. The people complained that they don't want to go into the land of Israel. So God said, so be it, you'll die here in the desert. And you'll wander here for 40 years. So as a result of their sin, they were forced to resort to this miracle of Miriam's Well. So that's another example of how the sins, which originally started with Adam and Eve, they brought the dynamic of sin into the world. Now, before I go any further, I just want to make it clear that it sounds like Adam and Eve are really terrible people, troublemakers, and this was a horrible thing. But the truth is, as the Midrash tells us, God wanted it that way. He wanted the world to be imperfect, so we can perfect it. This is the totally opposite the theology of the other religion that believes that the world is essentially negative and we cannot be saved by ourselves. We have to be saved by believing in some mythical God. We believe the opposite. The world was created to be a perfectly holy place. When God created the world was a paradise. The world was a perfect world. And God says, I don't want a perfect world. I want that. Let me correct myself. I want a perfect world. Ultimately, I want it to be restored to that way, but I want it to be imperfect now so that you restore, that you are my partners in creation and my partners in restoring the world to its intended purpose, to make the world perfect the way it was in the beginning, and even better. So in order to give us the challenges, God so orchestrated it that Adam and Eve would succumb to the temptation and eat of the forbidden fruit and bring evil into the world of goodness, so that our work is cut out for us for thousands of years to separate the two. And when we complete the separation, we restore the world to the way it was in the very beginning. So if someone asks the question, do we believe that the world is inherently evil or inherently good, or neither? And the answer is, we believe the world is inherently good, but became a mixture of good and evil, not inherently evil. And our mission and our task is to restore it to its original state of being inherently, and not only inherently, but visibly good. That's how we can put into a nutshell the whole theology of Judaism. So the mouth of the well that was created at Twilight, what does that mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that the well was created then, but it means that the potential for this well that would restore the people, even in their state of sin, that necessitated being in the desert and having this miracle happen, this well is the correction of their sin to restore the world to its original state, and that this is also a portent of the future of the Messianic age, when we will again draw nourishment from Miriam's well, maybe literally, certainly figuratively. Drinking of the well could be taken literally, that it means water, but it also means spiritually that the well represents the teachings of Torah that will be fully revealed in the Messianic age. Then we have the mouth of the donkey. Which donkey are we talking about? There's one very famous biblical donkey, although there are many today that match the description of the biblical donkey, and maybe even better.
Today we don't meet his donkey.
What is the story? Bilam was the heathen prophet who was hired by the Moabite king, Balak, who was terrified of the Jewish people who were approaching his land on the way to get into the land of Canaan. And he hired Bilam to curse the Jews. He knew he couldn't win a war against them because the Jews had already vanquished the two mighty empires of Sichon and Og. So he hires Bilam to curse the Jews. And Bilam, who was a prophet, a real prophet, he had a relationship with God, that which is an enigma. Here's this vile man, evil man, and yet God has a relationship with him. So there's a whole explanation behind that. that God heard the complaint of the nations of the world. Why do you expect us to be better than the Jews? The Jews have prophets, they have holy men that have a relationship with you. We don't have anyone like that. So God says, I'll give you someone like that, and it'll prove nothing. It'll prove that goodness does not depend on prophets. It depends on people following the Torah's teachings and following God's commandments. And if you want to rely that you're going to have some prophet that will redeem you, it's not going to help. And you can see how the other religion has put itself in the hands of what they consider to be a prophet. And I can be talking about more than one religion. And look how evil they have been throughout history, massacring millions of people in the name of their prophet, and committing all the greatest of atrocities. It's not the prophets who make us righteous. It's the fidelity to Jewish teachings, to the teachings of the Torah, that make us righteous. And the prophets are there to inspire us. There's no question that we do believe in prophets, and we have prophets, we had prophets, and we still have prophets. But these prophets, or these spiritual people, are not the ones who determine whether we'll be good or not. It's our own loyalty to Torah that will do it. At any rate, Bilam was on the road with it, riding his donkey to curse the Jews. And an angel appears and obstructs the path of the donkey. And the donkey just doesn't move. And then it squeezes Bilam's leg to the wall, and then he crouches under Bilam, and Bilam strikes it 3 times. And the donkey, God opens up the mouth of the donkey, and the donkey starts talking. Why did you hit me these 3 times? So that mouth of that donkey was created at twilight. Now, it doesn't literally mean that the donkey was that old. It means that the potential for that to happen took place. The potential was brought into existence at twilight of the first Shabbos. What did this donkey prove? One of the early commentators, known as the Meiri, says that you, Bilam, think you're such a big shot that you have such powers with your mouth. He says, you're no different from the donkey. I can open up a donkey's mouth, and you're no better. You shouldn't think it's your power. You have 0 power. And that's a lesson for us as well. We think we have all this power and all these greatness, and we have to know it's all God's power that is vested in us. That's the very basic lesson. And for contemporary society, I think all you have to do is turn on the radio, the television, the internet, and all you hear day and night are donkeys. They call it talk shows, but it's a bunch of talking donkeys. and sometimes you hear them using vulgar language, and they are no better, in fact, inferior to the donkey, Bilam's donkey, because Bilam's donkey didn't use vulgar language. But the donkey is also a positive metaphor for Mashiach. The Talmud tells us, based on a verse in the biblical book of Zechariah, that Mashiach, it says, will be coming riding on a donkey. What's the purpose of that metaphor? You mean Mashiach can't come in a Rolls Royce? He has to go on a donkey? So it's basically a metaphor. One metaphor is that, the simple metaphor is that Mashiach will come 2 different possibilities. One possibility, based on a verse in the book of Daniel, that he'll come riding on a cloud. Does that mean literally? No. It means that he'll come in a very majestic way. He'll come as a great, glorious leader. And the other scenario is he'll come in a very impoverished state, because the people will be very impoverished, physically and spiritually. But there's a deeper metaphor. The Hebrew word for donkey is chamor. Although Bilam's donkey was a female one, it has a different word, a tone. But the word that's used most of the time is chamor. The word chamor also means materialism. Mashiach will ride on his materialism. He will control the physical aspects of his existence, and ultimately, through him, the existence of the whole world. the challenges that we have are the challenges, the struggle between the soul and the body. The body wants control wants to make sure that we get what the body wants, and the soul wants to control the body. Sometimes we win the battle, the soul wins the battle, and sometimes the body wins the battle. But Mashiach is someone whose soul always wins his battles and will ultimately influence us. So this mouth of this donkey is also a hint, a portent of the future, that a time will come that the donkey will be able to speak. The donkey meaning even our bodies, even our lowly bodies will be able to express the words of God. That means that the soul will eventually control the physicality of our existence. And this potential for that was created at the very beginning of creation, at the time of twilight. Then we have the rainbow. As we're seeing over here, that all these things that were created have a dual message. On one hand, they're negative. The mouth of the earth was negative, to swallow up Korach, but it also had a positive image, that it was a vision of the future when the whole world will be swallowed up with godliness. Even the earth will be like the sea. The mouth of the well, Miriam's well, it has a negative connotation that the Jews had to resort to this miracle in order to survive in the desert for 40 years, which came about because of their sin. But also it has a positive image of Miriam's holiness and of the ultimate future when we will be able to drink from this well. And likewise, the mouth of the donkey has this dual, paradoxical message. Now, the rainbow was also in that category. Where's the biblical reference to a rainbow? It's in the book of Genesis, when God destroys the world through a flood, and only Noah and his family were survivors through the ark. After he comes out of the ark, Noah brings sacrifices, and God says and swears, "I will no longer bring a flood to destroy the earth." And to show that he was not going to do anything in the future to destroy the earth, a rainbow appears. And this is the sign that God will keep his promise. Now, rainbows are a natural phenomenon. But the need for rainbows came about, that natural phenomenon came about because it was necessary to be as a reminder to us, for us, that we have to recognize that sometimes the world is teetering. God is ready to destroy it because the world is so much evil in the world. But God has to keep his promise, so a rainbow appears. The Talmud says that in the lifetime of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the great Talmudic sages, they never saw a rainbow. Why? Because he made sure that his generation will be so protected by his own achievements, by his own righteousness. There was no need for a reminder. He was the ultimate reminder. At any rate, the rainbow is really a negative thing in that sense. When you see a rainbow, it's a sign that maybe we deserve to go through another flood. But God says no. So the rainbow was a negative reminder, which obviously it all started with Adam and Eve's eating of that forbidden fruit. But the rainbow was also a positive message. It says in the Midrash, I think in the Zohar as well, that when you see a rainbow, you should anticipate, it's a sign of God's glory, and you should anticipate the coming of Mashiach. So on one hand, the rainbow was a negative, but it also has a positive message. And that's true in every aspect of Judaism. Whenever you see something in Judaism that is negative, you also know that there's also a positive and happy message embedded in it as well. So that potential for us to be reminded of our evil came about right after Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit, but it's also a sign that ultimately the world will be cleansed and the world will come about, and that the rainbow would turn into a positive symbol and not be a reminder of our evil. Then we have the manna, number 6. Number five. The manna. Again, the manna is the lesson that God provides us with all our needs, as He did to provide for the needs of the people when they were in the desert. But again, the reason they were in the desert and necessitated the manna from heaven is because they were stuck in the desert for 40 years. And for those 40 years, the only way they could survive would be the manna from heaven. And that power to create the manna, in other words, that power to provide them as a result of their sins, was programmed into nature at the beginning of time, before the Sabbath, the twilight of the Sabbath. But it's also a harbinger of the future. The manna is pure, the pure food, had no waste. It was a symbol of the ultimate divine sustenance, which is perfect. Right now, sustenance is imperfect. Everything that we eat has waste. Everything that we eat has side effects. There's no such thing as a perfect food. A food that is only healthy, that has no side effects, that is good for everyone, no allergies. Everything in this world has imperfection in it as a result of the sin of Adam and Eve. But the manna was one symbol of food that had no imperfections in it. In fact, the manna, when you ate the manna, you could have the taste of any food you wanted. If you wanted to taste steak, you just thought of steak and you felt the taste of steak. If you want to taste ice cream, could you have ice cream with steak? Eating the same manna, one bite steak, one bite ice cream, milk and meat? It's a good question. And since it's not practical, I don't know, I don't have to give an answer because we don't have the manna right now. But that's a good...
We have the ability to eat fake meat with fake dairy.
Yeah, but the manna, the question was it fake? It's actually, the Torah, we're taught that the manna did not have the taste of certain foods that were unhealthy for a pregnant woman. So that means that the manna was not just some type of substitute, it was chemically the food that you wanted it to be. So if you wanted it to taste like steak, it was chemically steak.
So why did they ask for meat?
Why do they ask for meat? So the Talmud explains, because it's like someone telling you, tofu is just like, or a vegetarian hamburger is just like a real hamburger. No, it isn't. It's not the same thing. But even then, at least it looks like it. But when you eat a piece of tofu, it doesn't look like steak. Someone tells you it tastes like steak, you're not going to enjoy it. The people didn't enjoy the food because they couldn't see the food. They just tasted it, but they couldn't see it. But chemically, it probably was the same as the steak. So otherwise, why would a pregnant woman not be able to think she's eating some type of food if it had a different chemical composition? It wouldn't harm her, unless psychologically maybe it would. At any rate, that's not that important. So the manna represents perfection. So the twilight of Shabbos, on the eve of Shabbos, when the world reaches a state of perfection, and it predicts what the future will be, a state of perfection, God created the potential for the manna. So on one hand, the manna symbolizes dealing with negativity, dealing with the fact that they had to be in the desert because of their sins. But at the same time, the manna is also a symbol of the future when we will reach a state of perfection. It's also, manna is often used as a metaphor for Torah. The prophet actually uses the term lechem, bread, for Torah. But there's bread from heaven and there's bread from earth. So Torah also has two parts to it. There's the part of Torah that's earthly, that deals with earthly situations. It deals with life, the way we experience life, with all sorts of situations. But then there's also the part of Torah, the mystical part of Torah, that deals with spiritual matters. It deals with spiritual concepts. That's compared to the manna from heaven. In the Messianic age, all those secrets All those esoteric, all those mystical teachings of Torah will be fully revealed. So we'll have the manna from heaven in a figurative sense, if not in the literal sense. We'll do one more, the staff of Moses. Moses' staff was the staff with which he performed the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, and then getting the water out of the rock. This staff was a very special one. It was created, and according to the Midrash, it was created before this first Sabbath. It was given to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They bequeathed it to their descendants, who in turn bequeathed it to Noah, and Noah to Abraham. Noah and Abraham overlapped for 58 years, and Abraham gave it to Isaac and to Jacob, and Jacob gave it to Joseph. And where was it? Joseph had it in Egypt. So when Joseph died, the Pharaoh took it. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who was a Midianite priest, had a position in the court of Pharaoh. And he took that staff and he brought it to Midian and he planted it in his garden, and nobody could pick it up and take it out of the garden until Moses came, and that's when Moses acquired this staff. But what is the symbol of the staff? This is the power that God vested in Moses to be able to perform all these 10 plagues. But that's negative. The fact that he needed to do 10 plagues to punish Pharaoh, that has a negative connotation, and that's again the negative metaphor. But at the same time, the staff is also the symbol of leadership. And according to the Midrash, when the psalmist talks about God's staff, he's referring to the Mashiach, who will be the ultimate leader, a human leader, to be sure, but the ultimate human leader who will succeed Moses as the greatest leader of the Jewish people. So all these things that have this negative connotation and is also positive connotation were all created at the twilight of Shabbat. Why? Because the Messianic age is referred to as Shabbat, as the Sabbath of creation. So at the very first Sabbath of creation, God already planted the seeds for that to happen. Any questions?
Are these statements, the 10 things listed in the written Torah or in the oral Torah? Or both?
The fact that they were created at twilight is mentioned in the oral Torah. But these are things, the mouth of the earth, the book of Numbers, talks about how the earth swallowed up Korach. How the rock produced water is mentioned in the book of Numbers as well, in the book of Exodus and Numbers. The mouth of the donkey is mentioned in the Torah, the rainbow is mentioned in the Torah, the manna is mentioned in the Torah, and the staff is mentioned in the Torah. So these are all things that are mentioned in the Torah, but that they are connected to the twilight of creation, that's in the oral Torah.
Is there any chance that Mashiach won't know that he's Mashiach?
Yes, it's possible he doesn't know until the time comes for him to be revealed. There is such a possibility. Rabbi, you think you might be Mashiach?
It hadn't occurred to me.
Well, you never know. I could just guarantee you that I'm not.
Not from what I've experienced.
You can't guarantee that because you don't know.
No, you don't know if you are, but you can know if you're not. I'll give you an example. If you're a Kohen, you can't be Mashiach. So you're also excluded because you're on the highest rung of the hierarchy. Mashiach has to come from the bottom. Mashiach has to come from a very morally and ethically questionable status. He himself is beyond reproach, but he has to come. It says in the Gemara that you can't have a leader unless he has skeletons in his closet. They don't use the word skeleton, they use the word snakes and scorpions. That's why King David was accused of being an adulterer. King David's mother was accused of being an adulteress. King David came from a lineage of Ruth, who was a Moabite, and the question is whether she was allowed to be married to King David's great-grandfather. He was a descendant of Tamar, who had a relationship, which seemed like an illicit relationship with Yehuda. And then the Ruth came from Moab, who was a product of incest, Lot and his daughters. So there were a lot of very negative things in the ancestry of King David and Mashiach, who was a descendant of King David. That's precisely why, first of all, it's to give humility, and it's also to make sure that the evil forces don't put all their efforts to destroy Mashiach. The Satan says, this couldn't be Mashiach. Look at his ancestry. Look at his yichus. At any rate, that's another subject for another time. Any other questions? Okay, everyone have a good week. Tomorrow night we have our on Zoom 7 o'clock is our Parsha class, 7 to 7:30.